1947, even over here in the United Kingdom, we were becoming fascinated by the little box in the corner, as it was dubbed, television. Of course, as many people know, television really didn't come into its own for the United Kingdom, really, the British as such, for the very few at least, because although it had started way back in the late 1930s, it was closed down and then reopened, of course, after the Second World War. But Americans had already experienced the power of the box. And this really was a fascinating study because clearly during the war and just more or less straight after, every major cinema chain was seen as slump in return to people returning to see the flicks, the pictures, movies, films, whatever you want to call them. There was a big problem, in trying to get people to come back to the cinema. And obviously it was all about money, wasn't it? And as television became cheaper, and as I told you previously, really this was all down to the Queen's coronation in 1953, the power of the royals made sure that television boxes, as they were called, literally saw a surge. People wanted to watch the coronation, no longer happy just to listen to it on the wireless, the radio. They wanted to see the action. So drastic things had to take place. And this particular story I wanted to share with you because it just proves the power of what the royals could do. And in particular, a lady that I've often said has been, rather maligned, Queen Mary of Tech. You see, Queen Mary wasn't necessarily one for the arts, She was very much into sort of things like the Needlework Association, very keen on hospital visiting, having worked as a nurse herself. But really glitzy, glamorous locations, she sort of thought, that's not really for me. But people knew that if they could persuade her to come along, things may turn around. And this all really happened for the movie mogul J. Arthur Rank, because on the 30th of October 1947 at the Leicester Square Theatre, he managed to persuade Queen Mary to literally help the British film business. And boy, did she help it. As ever, let me explain. Morning, chums. Lovely to see you today. Thank you so much for your time. I know we've often said this on the show because I don't go to the cinema anymore simply because there's nothing on. I have gone to, those sort of vintage cinemas where they show something that or you may have seen, but you think, I wouldn't mind seeing that on the big screen. Everything now, as you know, is CGI, and consequently you kind of think, I kind of know how that's made and it takes the fun away. Plus, there's just no great stories. That's your problem, isn't it? Where are the good stories to make you think, wow, yeah, definitely, I'm interested in that. Now, you see, as I say, way back in 1947, even over here, we were seeing a massive slump in people returning to go to see things at the cinema, even though it was still incredibly cheap. And we had a plethora of huge box office stars. As I mentioned before, the likes of Margaret Lockwood, Stuart Granger, James Mason, Patricia Rock, and of course, budding upcoming stars like this particular lady and that particular film, The Lady in the Hall from 1947. The beautiful Susan Hampshire actually made her very brief, but nonetheless a significant debut. Now, this particular movie was, kind of interesting to Queen Mary, simply because she was a huge fan of the beautiful, brilliant actor that was Cecil Parker. She just loved his style. She thought his acting was brilliant. And once they realised, particularly the bosses of the Wessex Film Company, that this could be a chance to get her to come along and give a bit of a jolt to the much heralded, British film industry, because even by then, J. Arthur Rank, who was the boss of Rank Films, he was struggling. People were literally, films were getting harder to make. There was a bigger influx from Hollywood, more glitzy stars, and all thanks to the London Palladium and Val Parnell bringing over Hollywood stars to see literally in the flesh. So on the 30th of October 1947, Queen Mary agreed to attend the premiere. And this was a spectacular success. Not only did she mingle with the crowds, but also mingled with the boss, J. Arthur Rank. And all thanks to her, this particular movie, get this, took just over £97,000 in its first run. That is a colossal amount of money for 1947, given you could get into the cinema for literally pennies. And they said to her, we'd like to do something in return for you. And she said, no, nonsense, if I can help in any way, So after that, they started to send movies to Queen Mary to see if she'd like to attend that premiere or this premiere. The problem was she was very busy actually behind the scenes with many other projects, but where she could, she did. And she often held parties and went to benevolent funds for people that had worked work behind the scenes that had maybe fallen on difficult times. She was a very active, queen, if you like. She just did what was required. But they never forgot what she did for the movie, because this particular story was splashed literally all over the pages. And I know, as I often say this on the show, it's funny how things like that get forgotten and people only remember the sort of bigger stories. But the power of Queen Mary at that point was to be able to get a movie that wasn't necessarily stacked with star names. Yes, it had the beautiful Gene Simmons in it, but at that point still just rising up. She was able to get people to go, oh, if she likes it, we should go and see it. And they did in their droves. And all thanks to Queen Mary, the woman in the hall made a lot of money for the Rank Film organisation, something they never forgot. So much so, in fact, that they gave her her very own personalised film projector. How about that for a treat? Neil Sean in the very heart of London.